Let's start by clearing up one of the biggest myths in sex culture, because this one causes more anxiety, shame, and insecurity than almost anything else I hear about in my work. Pleasure is not about size. It never has been. Great sex is about skill, awareness, and connection. And once you truly understand that, the obsession with penis size starts to lose its power over you. Here's the truth most people are never taught. Bodies don't experience pleasure through measurements. They experience pleasure through sensation, attention, and emotional safety. When someone feels desired, listened to, and fully present with you, their nervous system relaxes, arousal increases, and pleasure deepens. None of that is determined by how long or thick someone's penis is. It's determined by how you show up. Think about what actually makes sex memorable. It's not a ruler moment. It's the way someone kisses you slowly, the way they touch you like they're curious instead of rushed, the way they respond to your breath, your sounds, your reactions. Skill means knowing how to read a partner's body, how to pace things, how to build anticipation, and how to stay tuned in rather than stuck in your head. And that kind of skill can be learned by anyone. When people fixate on size, they often skip the most important parts of sex. Foreplay gets rushed or ignored, communication feels awkward or avoided, there's less experimentation, less playfulness, and less confidence. Ironically, the obsession with size is what actually gets in the way of pleasure. Anxiety shuts down arousal. Self-consciousness pulls you out of the moment. And when you're busy worrying about how you measure up, you're not paying attention to how your partner feels. Here's something that surprises a lot of people. Most orgasms, especially for women, don't come from penetration alone. They come from external stimulation, rhythm, pressure, and consistency. Hands, mouths, toys, words, eye contact, breath, timing. All of these matter far more than anatomy. A partner who understands this and uses it skillfully will always be more satisfying than someone who relies on size and nothing else. Skill also means communication, asking questions, listening without defensiveness, being open to feedback. Saying things like, "Does this feel good?" or "Tell me what you want more of." That kind of confidence is incredibly attractive, and it creates trust, which is the foundation of real intimacy. When someone feels safe expressing their desires with you, sex stops being a performance and starts being a shared experience. Another thing we rarely talk about is that pleasure is mental as much as it is physical. Desire lives in the brain. When someone feels emotionally connected, respected, and seen, their experience of pleasure intensifies. That's why confidence, humor, kindness, and presence are powerful turn-ons. They create an environment where arousal can grow naturally. Size doesn't do that. Skill does, and skill isn't about being perfect. It's about being curious. It's about trying new things, paying attention to what works, and letting go of ego. Great lovers aren't the ones who assume they already know everything. They're the ones who are willing to learn. They adapt, they respond, they understand that every partner is different and that pleasure is not one size fits all. When you shift your focus away from size and towards skill, something powerful happens. You relax, you become more confident. You enjoy sex more, and your partner feels that energy. They feel your presence. They feel your intention. And that's when sex becomes deeply satisfying, not just physically, but emotionally too. So if you take one thing from this, let it be this. Stop measuring your worth by your body and start investing in how you connect, because the best lovers aren't defined by what they have. They're defined by how they use it. Let's talk about where this obsession with size actually comes from, because it didn't appear out of nowhere. Most people weren't born worrying about their bodies in this way. That anxiety was learned, absorbed, and reinforced over time, and a huge part of it comes from the media we consume. Porn, movies, social platforms, and even casual conversations have created a distorted version of what bodies are supposed to look like, especially when it comes to sex. Porn, in particular, has had an enormous influence on expectations. It often showcases bodies that are extreme outliers, edited, selected, and framed to look larger, harder, and more exaggerated than real life. Camera angles, lighting, performance, and enhancing drugs and editing all play a role in creating an illusion. But when people consume this content without context, they internalize it as normal. Suddenly, anything that doesn't match that fantasy feels inadequate, even though the fantasy itself isn't real. Social media adds another layer. Comparison culture thrives on extremes. Posts that stand out get attention, and attention reinforces the idea that bigger, louder, and more shocking is better. Jokes, memes, and offhand comments about size get shared endlessly, often without any awareness of the insecurity they reinforce. Over time, these messages sink in, shaping how people see themselves and others, even if they intellectually know it doesn't make sense. What's rarely shown in media is real sex. Real sex includes awkward moments, laughter, communication, pauses, adjustments, and emotional connection. It includes bodies of all shapes, sizes, ages, and abilities. But that doesn't sell clicks or views, so it gets left out. Instead, we're fed a highlight reel that trains us to believe that performance and appearance matter more than presence and connection. This kind of conditioning has consequences. When someone walks into intimacy already believing they're not enough, they're more likely to feel anxious, disconnected, or performative. They might overcompensate, rush, or shut down. They might avoid intimacy altogether, and none of that has anything to do with their actual ability to give or receive pleasure. It has everything to do with the stories they've been told about what matters. The truth is, most partners are not walking around with a checklist of measurements. They're paying attention to how they feel with you. Do they feel relaxed, desired, safe, curious, seen? Those things don't come from media myths. They come from real human interaction. When we let porn and pop culture define our expectations, we miss the opportunity to create our own experiences based on honesty and mutual enjoyment. Another important thing to understand is that porn is designed for visual stimulation, not education. It doesn't teach communication, consent, or emotional attunement. It doesn't show how people actually build arousal or navigate differences. So when people use it as a reference point, they're comparing real life to something that was never meant to be realistic in the first place. Breaking free from these unrealistic expectations starts with awareness. Notice where your beliefs came from. Question them. Ask yourself whether they actually match your lived experiences. Most people, when they reflect honestly, realize that their most satisfying sexual moments had very little to do with appearance and everything to do with chemistry, trust, and presence. When you stop letting media dictate your worth, something shifts. You begin to relate to your body with more compassion. You become more open, more curious, and more confident. You show up as yourself instead of trying to perform an image that was never real to begin with. And that authenticity is far more attractive than any exaggerated standard you've been taught to chase. So the next time you catch yourself comparing, remember this. The images that made you doubt yourself were designed to sell a fantasy, not define your value, and real pleasure begins the moment you stop measuring yourself against a lie. One of the most misunderstood truths about sex is this: confidence is not arrogance, and it's not about pretending you have everything figured out. Confidence is comfort. It's being present in your body, trusting yourself, and allowing yourself to show up without apology. And when it comes to attraction and pleasure, that kind of confidence is far more powerful than any physical trait. Think about how confidence feels when you're around it. It's grounding, it's calming. It creates a sense of ease. When someone is confident, they're not constantly checking themselves, judging their performance, or worrying about how they're being perceived. They're focused on the moment, they're attentive, they're responsive, and that presence is incredibly erotic because it makes the other person feel chosen, safe, and desired. Now compare that to what happens when someone is stuck in self-doubt. Their attention turns inward. They're distracted by thoughts like, "Am I enough?" or "What are they thinking about me?" That mental noise pulls them out of their body and out of the connection. And even if everything else is technically right, the energy feels off. Pleasure needs presence, and presence doesn't exist where anxiety takes over. Confidence also changes how you communicate. When you feel secure, you're more willing to ask questions, express desires, and listen without getting defensive. You don't take feedback as criticism, you take it as information. That openness builds trust, and trust deepens intimacy. The more emotionally safe someone feels with you, the more likely they are to relax into pleasure and explore what feels good. Here's something important. Confidence is not something you're born with. It's something you build. And one of the fastest ways to build it is by letting go of comparison. The moment you stop measuring yourself against imagined standards, you free up so much mental space. That space can then be used for curiosity, creativity, and connection. Confidence grows when you focus on what you can offer rather than what you fear you lack. Confidence is also deeply connected to how you treat yourself. When you have a respectful relationship with your own body, it shows. You move differently, you touch differently, you make eye contact, you breathe, you take your time. All of those things signal to a partner that you're comfortable being close, and that comfort invites closeness in return. Another reason confidence is such a powerful turn on is because it gives permission. When you're relaxed and accepting of yourself, you give your partner permission to do the same. They don't feel rushed to perform or pressured to be perfect. They feel like they can be real, and real connection is where pleasure thrives. Confidence also allows you to handle moments that aren't perfect. Sex isn't a scripted performance. There are pauses, changes, laughter, and adjustments. When you're confident, those moments don't feel like failures. They feel human. You move through them without shame, and that keeps the connection intact. That emotional resilience is incredibly attractive because it shows maturity and self-trust. And here's the part people often miss. Confidence doesn't come from external validation. It doesn't come from compliments, numbers, or comparisons. It comes from knowing that your worth isn't up for debate. When you stop outsourcing yourself, esteem to other people's reactions, you become more grounded. That grounding energy is felt instantly in intimate spaces. The irony is that when people stop trying to be impressive, they often become irresistible. Presence replaces performance. Curiosity replaces pressure. And sex becomes something you experience together rather than something you try to prove. That's when intimacy deepens and pleasure becomes more natural and more fulfilling. So if you're looking for the one quality that changes everything, focus less on how you look and more on how you feel in your own skin. Because confidence isn't about being flawless. It's about being fully there. One of the most freeing realizations people can have about sex is understanding how pleasure actually works in the body. For so long, we've been taught a very narrow, penetration-focused idea of sex, as if deeper automatically means better. But when you look at real anatomy and real experiences, that belief falls apart quickly. Most of the body's pleasure centers are not deep inside. They're right where attention, intention, and technique matter most. Take arousal itself. It's not something that happens instantly or automatically. It builds through anticipation, safety, touch, sound, and emotional connection. The body needs time to warm up, to feel relaxed and receptive. When that process is honored, pleasure expands. When it's rushed or skipped, even the ideal physical setup won't lead to satisfaction. Depth doesn't create arousal, attunement does. For many people, especially women, the most sensitive and pleasure-rich areas are external or near the entrance of the body. These areas respond to rhythm, pressure, consistency, and variation. That means how you move, how you touch, how you pace yourself, and how you pay attention all matter far more than how far something goes. Small adjustments in angle, tempo, or pressure can completely change the experience. That's skill, not size. Another thing that's often overlooked is how interconnected the body is. Pleasure isn't localized to one spot. It spreads when someone feels relaxed, desired, and emotionally present. Breath, voice, eye contact, hands, lips, words. All of these activate the nervous system and amplify sensation. When someone feels seen and tuned into, their body becomes more responsive. That's why intimacy can feel so intense even without penetration at all. This is where a lot of pressure disappears if you let it. When you stop believing that depth is the goal, you open the door to creativity and exploration. Sex becomes less about getting somewhere and more about experiencing what's happening right now. That mindset shift alone can dramatically improve satisfaction for both partners. It's also important to understand that everyone's body responds differently. What feels incredible to one person might feel neutral or even uncomfortable to another. That's not a failure, it's information. The most satisfying experiences come from paying attention to responses rather than assumptions. Listening to breathe changes, muscle tension, sounds, and movement tells you far more than any myth ever could. And here's something rarely said out loud. Deeper or harder isn't always better, and for many people, it can actually be uncomfortable or painful. When the focus is only on penetration, partners may feel pressure to endure rather than enjoy. But when the focus shifts to sensation and communication, pleasure becomes mutual and consent becomes embodied, not just spoken. When people understand how pleasure centers actually work, anxiety around size begins to fade. There's relief in realizing that satisfaction isn't dependent on something you can't change. It's dependent on how you show up, how you listen, and how willing you are to learn. That's empowering. It puts pleasure back into your hands literally and figuratively. This knowledge also strengthens connection. When partners feel prioritized and responded to, trust grows. That trust allows bodies to open more, minds to relax more, and pleasure to deepen. It becomes a shared experience rather than a performance. And that shared experience is what people remember long after the moment is over. When you stop chasing depth and start understanding sensation, sex becomes more intentional, more playful, and more satisfying. You're no longer trying to live up to a false standard. You're creating something real together, and that's where the most meaningful pleasure lies. Because when you understand the body, you stop worrying about how far you go and start focusing on how deeply you connect. There's a cost to obsession that people rarely talk about, and it shows up right in the moments where connection should feel easiest. When your mind is preoccupied with size, it's no longer available for pleasure. Instead of being in your body, you're stuck in your head, monitoring, judging, comparing. And that mental loop quietly pulls you away from the very intimacy you're trying to achieve. Performance anxiety is one of the most common results of this kind of fixation. When you're worried about whether you're enough, your nervous system shifts into stress mode. Stress and arousal don't coexist easily. The body tightens, breathing becomes shallow, and sensation dulls. Pleasure needs relaxation and presence, but obsession creates tension. So the more pressure you put on yourself, the harder it becomes to feel confident, connected, or responsive. That anxiety doesn't stay internal. Partners can feel it. They may not know exactly what's wrong, but they sense distraction, hesitation, or emotional distance. Eye contact fades, touch feels less intentional. Moments that could be playful or exploratory start to feel rushed or goal-oriented. And suddenly, sex feels more like a test than a shared experience. Obsession also interferes with communication. When someone is deeply insecure, they're less likely to ask questions or express curiosity. They may avoid feedback out of fear it confirms their worst thoughts. They might stick to familiar patterns instead of exploring what actually feels good, because trying something new feels too risky. That silence creates distance, even when two people care deeply about each other. Another hidden impact is how obsession narrows your focus. Instead of seeing the full picture of intimacy, touch, tone, timing, connection, you fixate on one trait as if it determines everything. That tunnel vision robs you of creativity and responsiveness. You miss opportunities to slow down, to adjust, to deepen connection in ways that have nothing to do with anatomy. And over time, this pattern can affect emotional closeness beyond the bedroom. When someone feels inadequate, they may pull back emotionally to protect themselves. They might joke, deflect, or shut down rather than risk vulnerability. But intimacy thrives on openness. When fear replaces honesty, connection weakens, even if the desire is still there. It's important to say this clearly. Obsession doesn't motivate better sex. It doesn't make you more attentive or skilled. It does the opposite. It creates pressure where ease is needed. It replaces curiosity with control, and control is the enemy of pleasure. Letting go of this obsession is not about pretending insecurities don't exist. It's about recognizing that they don't deserve to run the experience. When you release the need to measure yourself, you free up energy for listening, touching, responding, and enjoying. You become more emotionally available, and that availability changes everything. Presence is what makes someone feel wanted. Presence is what makes touch feel intentional. Presence is what allows pleasure to build naturally. When you're fully there, you notice subtle cues, you adapt, you connect, and that connection is what people remember, not a number or a comparison. The most fulfilling sexual experiences come from mutual attention, not self-surveillance. They come from being willing to be seen as you are, rather than trying to perform an idea of what you think you should be. When you let go of obsession, you invite authenticity, and authenticity is what deepens intimacy and trust. So if you want stronger connection, better sex, and more confidence, the answer isn't obsessing harder. It's releasing the fear that's pulling you out of the moment, because intimacy begins the moment you stop watching yourself and start feeling each other. There's a belief many people carry into adulthood that great sex is something you either naturally have or you don't, like a talent you're born with. And that belief quietly does a lot of damage. Because when you think sex is innate, you stop learning. You stop asking questions. You assume that whatever you're working with is your ceiling. But the truth is, great sex is a skill set, and like any skill, it grows with education, practice, and curiosity. The most satisfying lovers are not the ones who assume they already know everything. They're the ones who stay open. They pay attention. They're willing to learn from each experience and from each partner. They understand that bodies change, desires evolve, and no two people experience pleasure in exactly the same way. That mindset alone makes intimacy more fulfilling because it replaces pressure with exploration. Learning how to be a better lover doesn't mean memorizing techniques or chasing perfection. It means developing awareness of your own body, your responses, your patterns, awareness of your partner's cues, boundaries, and desires. It means being willing to slow down, to ask to listen, and to adjust. Those skills can be practiced by anyone, regardless of body type or anatomy. One of the most powerful shifts happens when you stop thinking of sex as a performance and start thinking of it as a conversation. A conversation isn't scripted. It flows, it responds, it adapts. Sometimes you lead, sometimes you follow. Sometimes you pause. When you approach intimacy this way, mistakes aren't failures, they're feedback. And feedback is how learning happens. Education also plays a huge role. Understanding anatomy, arousal, desire, and emotional intimacy changes how you experience sex. It helps you let go of myths and replace them with knowledge. Knowledge builds confidence, and confidence allows you to relax. When you're relaxed, your body is more responsive, your mind is more present, and pleasure becomes easier to access. Practice matters too, but not in the way people often think. It's not about repetition without awareness. It's about intentional practice, trying new things, noticing what works, and letting go of what doesn't. It's about being curious instead of critical. The more curious you are, the less room there is for shame or self-judgment. Another key part of learning is feedback. Many people fear it because they associate it with criticism. But feedback, when given and received with care, is an invitation to connect more deeply. It's a sign that your partner trusts you enough to be honest. When you welcome that honesty, intimacy grows. You're no longer guessing, you're collaborating. What's often overlooked is that learning how to give pleasure also teaches you how to receive it. You become more attuned to your own needs and boundaries. You feel more comfortable expressing desire. That mutual openness creates a feedback loop where both partners feel empowered and engaged. And here's something important: learning never ends. Long-term relationships, new relationships, and even solo exploration all offer opportunities to deepen your understanding of pleasure. There's no finish line, and that's a good thing. It means intimacy can continue to evolve rather than fade into routine. When you embrace the idea that great sex is learned, not measured, you release yourself from comparison. You stop competing with unrealistic standards and start investing in real connection. You realize that pleasure isn't about what you have, it's about what you cultivate together. So instead of asking whether you're enough, ask whether you're present, curious, and willing to grow, because the most powerful intimacy comes not from what you're born with, but from what you're willing to learn.